So welcome to Q&A with Renee. I'm here with one of my dearest friends, Amina Taha Cosper. And Amina's one of my oldest friends that I've had here in New York City. I met her actually shortly after she finished her 200 hour. And I think I met you maybe the day before you left back for Abu Dhabi.
Oh yeah.
And we had like one day to shoot, and then they were like off for their flight, and then like her parting words were, "Come visit in Abu Dhabi." And I didn't know if you thought that I wouldn't show up, but I did. I showed up.
I felt like you were the type that would show up.
Yeah.
I felt like I was saying it and my invitation was going to be accepted.
Yeah. Because sometimes I feel like people are like, "Oh, come visit," knowing that the other person won't visit. But actually, I did visit, and we had a great visit. We had a great trip. Mm-hmm. We took a lot of photos and
went to fun places,
and I got to see some of the Middle East. It was my first time there. And then Amina wound up moving here. I forget like how much.
I think a year after.
Maybe a year after. But it's been amazing just to see her trajectory. I met her before she was even signed with Aloe. The first photo shoot that we did with her sister Hannah, it was so funny. I look at the pictures and there's just like a sweetness to them, because I could tell like
the innocence.
There was innocence on like everyone's part, right? Like there was like a complete like almost a non-awareness.
Lack of awareness, that's what I was thinking.
of like outfits and how you should pose like different people. And
I love these photos. Renee is not the biggest fan of these photos, but I was wearing jeans and Hannah was wearing shorts. The colors were not coordinated.
No.
We were somewhere with like a big patch of grass. But that's actually, those photos, I knew that Renee had something special when I saw them. She was like still starting out, but they're still my favorite photos to this day.
I feel like
she's like, I've improved a lot.
Yeah. I feel like at that point it was what I made up, for like in lack of experience, I made up for in enthusiasm.
Yes.
We'll say it like that.
Totally.
But like Amina is signed with Aloe now. She did her 200 hour with Yoga Works, and then she did her 300 hour with Jared at Lighthouse Yoga School, and then she just started teaching. And now she is a teacher, and she has her own app, which is incredible.
Thank you.
I'm very, very proud.
Thank you.
But I know if you've been following Amina for a while, you've kind of just seen her path. So what I actually wanted to talk about was how she grew up, because it's interesting, and she is my only Egyptian friend. But I feel like growing up outside of the U.S. definitely shapes who you are as a person and as a teacher in a different way. And so, can you speak to that, please?
Yes. So I actually grew up the first few years of my life. I think when I was 2, I moved out of Egypt, and my dad's job had us kind of moving all around. So we spent some time in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, London, and New Jersey, because he worked in New York, so we lived in New Jersey for a while. And it was kind of crazy because I started out in a French school, so I was speaking primarily French, and then I moved to the US where I couldn't speak a word of English, and then I had to kind of learn English and all of that. And then I moved back.
So how old were you when you learned English then?
2nd grade.
Okay.
So I went into 2nd grade not knowing a word of English. Mm-hmm. And I was in a public school in New Jersey, and I would go home and tell my parents, I said this and then they said that, and she's like, how? You don't know a word of English. But I just kind of immersed myself into it, and I kind of picked it up. And a few years later, my parents were, they're conservative Egyptian. They were like, we want our daughters, right before the like dating age, the teenage age, they were like, we want our daughters to grow up in their culture and to not be very like westernized. They want us to like know where we're from. So they made the decision to move back to Egypt. And I remember experiencing a little bit of a shock when I moved back, because things were just, school culture was very different. It was actually a lot more liberal in Egypt than it was in the US for me. Like my experience was like that. And Yeah.
Did you always speak Arabic at home? So going back to school in Egypt wasn't.
I mean, no, actually, I think one of also the other reason that they moved back is that they were worried that we started to lose our Arabic. We would answer them in kind of broken Arabic English, and they freaked out. They were like, okay, we need to get these girls back home so that they can speak their language and, you know, stay in touch with the culture. So when I first moved back, my Arabic I think it took me like a few years. Luckily, the schools there give you like an exemption, so you're not forced to like study Arabic until you kind of settle back. But it was a bit of a shock. But then I started to see, you know, the differences, and I think at some point I kind of kept both things that I liked about both cultures. Like for me, I loved in Egypt how we're always around people. Whereas when we grew up, when my dad was working abroad, we were always kind of alone. We were very attached to my mom, and then when we moved back to Egypt, it was like family all the time and people visiting, and you just get so accustomed to having like such a social life from a young age. You get used to like talking to everybody, and I really liked that about the culture, how connected everyone was, like the cousins and the grandparents, and you're always surrounded by people. So I remember that took a bit of an adjustment, but then it was something I really loved. And yeah, my parents always were like, you know, me and my sister are 2 years apart, and we've always been very different. She's very academic, and I'm more like artistic, creative, and they never kind of compared us. They were always like, you do what you love, and they always told me at a really young age, whatever you love and you're passionate about, you'll succeed in. So that's the only thing that matters, is like what you love and following that. So I always knew that in the back of my head, that I wasn't so worried about what I would end up doing, because I was like,
Is that specific to your parents, or is it like
No, it's specific.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I think so, because not all my friends had the same kind of support. Like I would get straight A's in my art and English, and I would kind of struggle a little bit more with math, and they were always just like, it's okay, you know, you're doing really well at this, just focus on this. That was very different from the rest of the people that I was surrounded by. And they always just nurtured our love for things. Whatever we're interested in, they would be like, oh, get books about this, learn about it, study it. So after I finished my undergrad, where I studied philosophy and art, something that's very, you have no idea what you're going to work with that. Then I wanted to study fashion, and they encouraged me to go and study fashion abroad. And they were, again, amazing and supportive. Just go, learn it, see what you want to do with it. So that was my first kind of thing, where I studied fashion and worked in fashion when we met.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I had that job when we met.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know.
Yeah. I'm like, I hadn't switched over to yoga completely back then.
I think that you are very fortunate to have that, and it's been true for all your sisters as well.
Yeah, everyone does their own thing.
Yeah.
Everyone's following their own path, and and even recently, I said something to my dad, and I was like, yeah, but this is so difficult. And he's like, if you believe it, it's going to happen. And I was like, this is such a good reminder. It's beautiful that they're like that, and they just hold on to that. Yeah.
It's like they're teaching you just to trust in yourself,
Yeah.
trust in your interests, and your curiosity will lead you on the right path.
Yeah, which is very yogic of them. They're yogis on the inside, and they don't even know it.
Yeah, totally. But then how? I almost feel like there's a creative freedom though that's allowed to blossom within that sort of encouragement, right? Because it's not like they were ever putting restrictions on you, like you're actually not going to make money in fashion, you won't make money doing yoga. It was like they just encouraged you to do and to follow your passion. How has that
totally.
kind of creativity and freedom channeled into your teaching, or has it not?
Well, it's actually interesting, because in moments where it's very non-fear based, that they just encourage you to do what you love, and that finances will flow into your life because of that passion. But then there's moments where they're just being protective and parents. So they'll say, I remember when I wanted to quit my fashion job after doing an intro to fashion, a master's somewhere really, a big fashion place, and then having my job, and then I wanted to quit. I remember them being fear-based, and they're like, how could you leave all of this, and do yoga? They had that moment. And then I remember just switching over to how they would normally talk to me or think about it. And I was like, I know that I can be, I can be happier and more successful doing this because this is my passion. So I actually just kind of channeled them into myself, and I followed that. And then they said, you were right. It's good that you did this because you're so much happier, and there's a lot more opportunity for growth when you're doing something that you really love and you're your own boss. So that definitely stayed with me, and I still, to this day, when I work on my app or teaching or whatever, I always think back to that. How can I be more creative? How can I grow from a place of not like being scared of what's going to come, but actually how can I share more of what I love with people? That's like the core of the teaching that I try to do.
Right, and I feel like that's also like your app is an extension of that as well, because it does allow you to share your teaching with people who normally wouldn't have access to it, especially since you're teaching in person here.
Yeah.
And then, occasionally when you go back, or I guess annually when you go back to Egypt.
Yeah,
there's always there's always a workshop, but it's like one workshop, right?
Yeah.
Versus actually being there.
Being there consistently. Yeah, and I love going back there and teaching, and it's so interesting how you'd think yoga is different everywhere you go, but it's like the same. And so I love sharing that, wherever I am in the world, it's like, it's the same thing, it's the same language, it's the same practice, essentially. So that's been fun to go home and teach.
One of my clients that I've had, her name is Sarah. She told me you're like the most famous yoga teacher in the Middle East.
The Middle Eastern yogi.
Yeah. How does that make you feel?
Makes me feel embarrassed. But it's cute. I mean, I love the sense of pride that even like everyone feels when you're from the Middle East, and then someone from the same country as you, like you hear their name in some way, and you're like, oh, amazing. Like I've had that feeling with like squash players, and I love that yogis feel that same way.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. I'm very lucky.
Yeah, when she said that, I was just like very proud. I was like, that's
Proud
Amina.
mama.
I was, yeah.
Proud mama.
Totally. And so what do things look like in the future then? Like, where do you think you would like to go with your teaching?
I'm not very good with planning the future. I try to live like day by day, but I mean, I really want, my dream with the app is that it reaches anyone that wants to practice, and that there's never a reason why they can't subscribe to the app, so that it's accessible. And kids, I want to expand it so there's like a lot more stuff for like moms, kids, like everything like that, so that it's a way to exactly like offer yoga to someone's living room. Because even pre-pandemic, I was a big fan of like home practice. Before, when I started my job, I actually didn't have time to go to a yoga studio, and where I lived was somewhere kind of isolated from the city, so I couldn't go to like a studio every day. And I just there was like not that many apps back then. And there was one app that was like animated, it wasn't even a real person. It was called the Yoga Studio, and I would put it in the morning every day, and that was my yoga practice. I learned how to headstand with that app. I would pause, I would repeat things, and so for me, like having that home practice is so essential, because so many people don't have access to good studios or to even studios, and it teaches them to trust themselves and to work with themselves like slowly. So I really love that. And even pre-pandemic, I was like, I want to put stuff out there that can reach just like anyone around the world. So
yeah, I remember you telling me like there's students that you had who you first met on Zoom that are now coming to your in-person classes.
It's so surreal. Yeah. It's like, we've kind of experienced this difficult COVID time together from their living room. And then you get creative, you're using your wall, you're using your chairs. It's so fun, and I really love practicing like that. I'll always choose to practice on an app versus to go to a studio. That's just me. So I think it's important that I have something like that to put out. So my goal is just to grow it and to have it reach as many people as possible.
I feel like even within the app, there's already been expansion though, because you're very into Pilates and core work, and I know you take bar classes.
As you know from the classes.
Yeah, like her core stuff is really not a joke, because she loves the burn.
Yeah,
and so she's addicted to the burn. So it's all about the burn, and so I think it'll be cool to see how your classes morph. Yeah, exactly, like morph and develop, and also like the integration with your in-person classes as well.
I think it's interesting. I think as a teacher, you do have to like also weave in your passions. If you start to kind of be in love with like other things outside of yoga, I think sometimes we're scared because we're like, students expect this of us. But actually, the more you evolve and the more you bring this into your craft, the more it's like you stand out and you have something different to offer. So falling in love with like the glute work and the core stuff after having a baby, I think kind of changed my teaching in a way. And at the beginning, you do your teacher training, you're just kind of following or like regurgitating what your teachers tell you. And then somewhere along the way, you're like, oh, but I like this. Oh, I don't like saying that. And then you find yourself. So yeah, that's been really cool. And I hope to do more of that in the future. But yeah, it's just, you can't just stay doing one thing. I think you have to see what else sparks your curiosity.
For sure.
Yeah, so that's kind of something I found myself falling in love with, and I try to incorporate it into the classes. But I also just have pure like Pilates or bar classes on the app for people that are like, I just want vinyasa flow. I don't want to be, feeling my glutes burning the whole time. And it's a different thing. Like you can want both on different days.
I know you also integrate weight training into your own practice as well. So I'm assuming there's like strength.
Yeah, strength-based stuff. Because when I realized after having a baby, after being a mom, my body needed something different. And at some point I was like, my yoga practice was great for me spiritually, but I wanted a little bit more physically. I wanted to like balance out my weaknesses. I wanted to find a little bit more stability. So I started even training at a gym, which is something I thought I would never ever do. But somehow I fell into it. And then from there I also found like Pilates and bar, and I realized those are things that complement my yoga practice. So yeah, it's something that I think as a mom, my needs shifted a little bit. Yeah. After pregnancy and C-section and all that.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because I feel like people who are like established yoga teachers, they actually go searching outside of yoga to fix something that's going on within themselves. And then it's like the more knowledge you have, the more integration that you can also have and pass along to your students.
Yeah, and the anatomy that you learn from like doing a Pilates teacher training is sadly way more thorough than yoga. And so I realized like I need to learn this stuff. I need to, this will help me even as a yoga teacher. So just to constantly keep learning, I think is something that is essential, Yeah. But I do think that some of my students, for example, it's a scary thing to kind of like move out of what you are used to doing. And some of my students are like, I've never ever done Pilates, and now I'm in love with it. I'll go and like take classes, because it's like you hear something, you're like, I don't know if I want to try it, but when you just gently start weaving things into something, you're like, this is actually Pilates now. Yeah. You're doing it. So.
Surprise.
Yeah.
So how's mom life going?
Well, it's easier when your child gets more independent and starts going to school. It's definitely easier. I always get asked like, how do you make time for your practice and your mom? And I think the first like couple of years of your baby's life, if you have no help or your baby's not going to like daycare, you definitely don't. It's like I'm not gonna, unless you have, your husband takes over, which I was lucky to have a lot of help from my husband and my mom. But it's like, it has to be a part of your day where I would just kind of keep my mat out, my baby's crawling all over me, and I'm doing something. Yeah. And then same, back and forth like that. It's not like your Zen 1 hour practice, or I used to practice for 2 hours. Not anymore. It's not like that, but you just kind of do it where you can. But now that he goes to school, there's more routine and there's more me time, and I can organize my time to, go to dog pound, get a workout, or go for a walk, whatever. So yeah, mom life is its own thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, as if you have like a younger child, that might seem like you'll never be able to have time again to do your practice, but
you have to prioritize it too, because I do see some of my mom friends that are like, well, there's just no time, it's just not gonna. But I think you'll be surprised if you just let go of this idea of how your practice should look, and you just embrace that it's going to be chaotic, and you try a little bit every day is better than nothing at all, because it gives you a chance to connect to your body, especially after all the changes that it went through. And I think for me that was an essential thing, that I was like, okay, I have a new body. I'm not going to compare it to what it was before, but I'm not going to necessarily just deem it as worse and that's it, give up, because a lot of times we fall into that trap. And it's like, it's a new one. It could even be better, but it can be stronger. You could be as proud of it or even more as before, but you have to like put in the work, you know, and not be strict with how you think be flexible, like adapt. Yeah.
And I think also trust that progress will just look different as well.
Yeah, for everyone. And I think, it's like society places so much pressure on women on how they should look, on how that they should be doing like everything after birth, and it's not the reality.
Yeah.
So just not everyone has help, you know, not everyone has the opportunity to like step out, take some time for themselves, and that's okay, you know. So that's why having an easy home practice that you could just commit to without feeling so much pressure, I think is great.
Yeah. I think that also after you gave birth, you had like a lot of recovery work to do on your
just simple stuff, like taking it back to basics. And I think, honestly, I had no idea about the core pre-pregnancy. I probably had a very weak core, and I was shoulder dominant and like leg in my yoga practice. And after having to go through that recovery is how I learned about the core and how I teach core now. I wouldn't have found it if I hadn't gone through this, you know, this surgery or this like setback, you know, so to speak. So sometimes these things happen, and they force you to teach, to learn something, or like to teach yourself something that you can then add as, you know, as one of your, something you can offer to your students. Yeah, so I really like that. Not in high, you know, back then I wasn't happy about it, but now looking back, I'm like, this was a blessing. Yeah.
I feel like your core is looking very strong
now.
Yeah, it is for sure.
The first time I started doing this stuff, I was like, I probably didn't know how to do this pre-C-section. Like, this was probably super hard. And I see a lot of people that are the same as me. They're like, why is this so hard? I'm like, yeah, it's hard for everyone. So not just if you've, you know, I learned about like the diaphragmatic breathing and the core, and I realized like so many people in the yoga world don't know about this, and it's a thing that you can kind of teach them, and they'll use it every single day. And it changes how their core works and all that. So it's fascinating. Yeah, I definitely fell in love with that.
Okay. So let's talk about, we'll just wrap up the interview talking about food.
Okay. That was a very weird switch.
Yeah, sorry. Well, you know, we like to keep these interviews short and compact. And then I like to end on food because it's one of my favorite things. So what's one of your favorite foods?
Right now, I'm obsessed with the cinnamon rolls. I was disappointed that you don't share the same love for the cinnamon rolls.
No.
So the cinnamon rolls are my favorite thing. I mean, we, instead of getting a slice of cinnamon roll, now we go and get the whole loaf of cinnamon roll.
Right.
And every day
it's like a fancy cinnamon roll though, right?
It's so good. It's like this Danish, I think it's Danish, Danish Olenstein, I'm probably saying it wrong, bakery, but you get the whole thing. And like the three of us in this family are obsessed with it. And the three of us will eat one per day, so it doesn't even last. It's like, I found that my son at first was like, I don't like it. Now he's like, can I have more? He loves it.
Okay, so then I'm definitely gonna have to try it.
You have to try it. Yeah, so cinnamon rolls. What else do I like to eat? I'm really loving melons and fruits.
Okay, it's very wholesome.
And I'm loving the BCD, like the tofu soup.
Yeah.
The kimchi tofu soup.
Okay.
I have phases with it where I'm like, I don't want to even think about it, and then phases where I eat it every day, and now I'm in the phase of I'm eating it every day.
All right.
So we can go eat that together.
We'll just say it's like a well-rounded international palate.
Yes. Danish cinnamon rolls, Korean, and just fruits.
And fruits. Okay, cool.
What about you?
Oh, cookies, always, and I am very into pizza at the moment. But like the good pizza, the Neapolitan pizza.
Yeah, not the New York pizza.
Well, it's like, but with like the buffalo mozzarella and like the basil and the really nice tomato sauce.
Oh, nice.
I spent too much money on a pizza from Italy, and it came to me delivered and it was cold, and I was very disappointed. So I guess that wraps things up.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm
honored to be on your YouTube.
Yeah, and we'll probably do a part 2, so
stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Thank you for watching.